Chapter 7, The 100-Year Drive. Following the questioning, we were all released from Newton Station. As we walked in silence, I had the queasy feeling that the police believed that I was somehow involved, doubted that I had provided them with all that I knew. Whether it was my street instinct or my experience as a probation officer, from the way they questioned me, looked at me, I could just tell. I was both interviewed as a victim and interrogated as a suspect. I would be watched. I was a person of interest, or a POI. I kept replaying how my sisters looked at me at the police station, then collapsed when they saw that I was clueless. Now I prayed they too didn't distrust me. Since the crime occurred, we had all been separated and not allowed to speak to one another. I had to talk to everyone, try to reassure them, figure out what happened. Most important, we needed a plan to protect ourselves against any further harm. But before we could meet up, the police told me that someone would need to identify the bodies. So I drove to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office on North Mission Road, east of downtown. Although it was just mid-morning, the day already felt endless. As I drove north on the Harbor Freeway, I kept telling myself that none of this could possibly be real, that somehow a great mistake had grown out of control. I knew it wasn't a dream, but I kept holding out hope that somehow everyone was wrong. There's been a big mistake, Mr. Alexander. You won't be needed here anymore. There are no bodies for you to identify. But then the bags appeared, and the coverings were pulled back, numb. For the record, I identified the remains. And as I did, I felt not only sorrow, but rage, self-hatred. The family protector failed to protect. I overslept. I was late. I could have saved them. But no time for that. From the morgue, I had another task. I called UCLA and spoke with the head coach, Terry Donahue. My youngest brother, Kirk, and my son, Kelton, both played as defensive backs for the Bruins. I told Coach Donahue to get them into his office that I had some sad news to deliver. He offered me his condolences and said he had already heard. He said neither Kelton nor Kirk knew. He asked me if I wanted him to tell them. No, I said. This was only news I could personally deliver. He said he would pull them out of the team meeting. The drive from the morgue to UCLA took forever, more brutal traffic. I needed to get back and talk to Ivan and Neil, find out what really happened inside that house. I needed to help my sisters. Hoping for answers while stuck on the freeway, I searched the radio. Over and over again, no motive. The police are remaining tight-lipped. No indication that it was gang-related. All we know is that two gunmen burst into the house and opened fire. A man who lived on the block stated, "I heard the shots, then I heard things falling. I saw one male leave, then another." A woman who lived next door said she saw a pair flee on foot, one carrying what appeared to be a machine gun. Both neighbors spoke upon only guarantee of anonymity, unwilling to give their names for the fear of retaliation. Retaliation from whom, I wanted to scream. Who the hell shoots sleeping children? And my mother's neighbors kept asking the same question as they mourned their fallen friend. They were the nicest people you would ever want to know. They'd been there for years. She was a beautiful woman, said one. Very holy family. She was a very Christian lady, said another. Then word that Reverend Jules Mayer of Maddie's Church, St. Columbkill, had administered the last rites. Mayer described our family as very kind, gentle, and quiet people. I couldn't believe the cruel irony. My first waking thought, I couldn't wait to drive over and tell Maddie the good news about my job with UCLA football. Now I drove to meet the UCLA football coach to tell his players, my son and brother, of the crisis. The day already felt like one unending drive. From my home in Hollywood to West 59th, from West 59th to Newton Station, from Newton Station to the coroner's office, and from the coroner's office to UCLA. And it continued. From UCLA and Westwood, I learned that I had to drive to the airport to pick up my brother Gordon. So I headed south on the 405 to Los Angeles International Airport. Gordon was an Army airplane mechanic, stationed up north in Monterey. He had just received the news and was flying home. As I continued south, I listened to more coverage on the radio. Right now, we cannot eliminate any possible motives, from disgruntled friends to anything as outlandish as you might think, a police spokesman said. We are hindered, he continued, by the absence of evidence left by the suspects. The words of one of the detectives at the station kept haunting me. He said the crime just didn't seem like the typical gangland drug killings that had plagued the area recently. Something was different about this one. It just seemed personal. At times, I almost lulled myself into thinking I was simply listening to the news, another violent day in the neighborhood. Like any other motorist that day, I was just taking in the horrors of modern urban life. Surely they must be talking about somebody else. These things happen to other people. Then it would pierce, and reality would scream, "This is my mother, inside her home." A horror movie had become my life. And then I heard the deep, reassuring voice of my friend Tom Bradley coming over the radio, issuing a statement. I turned up the volume. Maybe the mayor knew something. "I was sorry to learn of the personal tragedy in the Kermit Alexander family today," he began. "The LAPD is investigating, and we hope to make some determination regarding the motive and suspects." I expressed my heartfelt condolences to Kermit Alexander. Reassuring voice, nothing reassuring. The newscast continued, the reporter's voice returning. "The Alexander Massacre is just the latest tragedy to shake South Central Los Angeles in a 2-week wave of rising violence." Cut back to the mayor. "The latest series of shootings have caused us great concern. We want everybody to know that the police department is responding, that they do have a plan, that they have gone into action, and we believe that their actions are going to result in control of these series of shootings." Bradley concluded by expressing his alarm at the increasing mayhem, announcing there would be a police crackdown, with additional officers from the department's Metropolitan Division stationed in the area to combat the problem. Again, nothing. As the drive continued, the repeated newscasts were too surreal to grasp, but too real to deny. As with Kirk and Kelton, I dreaded meeting with Gordon. I knew that he too would blame himself for his absence. The curse of the Alexanders, a code of honor without mercy. If a family member is wronged, someone in the family is at fault. Someone failed, let them down. 4 were dead, someone must pay. I also feared Gordon might lose it. He had a volatile temper. He was just another person that I would have to watch. As I pulled into the airport, I was met by the press. I told the reporters, "I don't have anything that would explain it. I'm the oldest in the family, and when anything happens that might be a problem, I'm the one my mother would get in touch with." She didn't express any worries to me. As I spoke with the press, Gordon arrived. We hugged and the tears fell. "As a mother, she was terrific," I said. "She believed in her religion, her family, and everything else was secondary." Gordon got the last words. "She was the strongest woman I had ever met." As we drove from the airport back to my sister Daphne's house in South Central, Gordon and I listened to more news coverage. Mixed with continued statements of shock over the murders were stories of the sudden rash of deadly violence that had hit the neighborhood since the Olympics. Many expressed the opinion that our case, a daylight home invasion quadruple homicide, sounded a call for action, a desperate plea. Citizens bemoaned the loss of their neighborhood, their security, and their freedom to walk the streets. "It used to be just a beautiful neighborhood," one woman said, "in which you could walk around any time of day or night. Now people went to the market only on the buddy system, so as to not leave themselves alone and vulnerable." Complaints included the fact that senior citizens literally ran to get off the streets before dark, and that many of the businesses of the South Central Los Angeles area operate during normal business hours with locked doors. Black Los Angeles was a mix of folks who came west to be free of Jim Crow. But these inner city residents, enslaved by the fear of violent crime, explained a sad deja vu as old threats were reborn. "Don't be out after dark. Don't get caught on the wrong side of the tracks. Don't look them in the eye. Just cross the street if you see them coming." Now, beaten down and terrorized by their own youth, the people of South Central feared black boys with baggy pants as they once had white men in pointed hoods. Jesse Jackson would even admit that when he hears footsteps, he's relieved when he sees a white face. Then followed it up with, "After all we've been through, just to think we can't even walk down our own streets. How humiliating." Yes, how pathetic. For generations we fight for freedom, and when we get it, we imprison ourselves. And my family, my mother, who had endured so much, paid the price. My mind thrashed, a wave of fury crested. More driving. Calm, I told myself as I drove. I must remain calm for my family. I cannot let them down again. I cannot go down in a blaze of road rage. Gordon was silent, brooding. I tried to refocus on the radio, as if the reports were just the same old accounts of violence in South Central, the same old reports to which we'd all become desensitized. I could no longer fake detachment. No distance existed. The stories were all personal, immediate. They were mine. Now anything touching upon crime and violence in the city of Los Angeles was ours. Unbelievably, all of this was about us, my family, me. Those same old accounts were no longer about unknown statistical others. As we drove from the airport east towards South Central, the raw emotion consumed us. Our past lives no longer existed. My brother and I broke down. This cycle of disbelief, quick flashes of detachment, followed by stark grief, became its own reality, claustrophobic, relentless. I drove in a sort of fool, unaware of traffic, stoplights, street signs. Over 100 degrees, the sun simply washed everything out, leaving behind a scorched gray. What willpower it took just to function as a zombie. The city was harsh, indifferent, it did not care. I kept going, right at the speed limit. I was driving like kind of an automaton, fulfilling a duty, completing chores, one after another. Death chores, the task of identifying the dead, burying the dead, winding down lives. Back to the furnace, back to the roads. I never really noticed I was driving, nor paid attention. It just kind of happened. At this point, I felt like I had been driving for 100 years. Back to the radio. Next report. Earlier that day, 8th District Councilman Robert Farrell submitted a motion to the Los Angeles City Council demanding that Police Chief Daryl E. Gates report on the steps being taken to curb the violence plaguing South Central. Farrell was a longtime family friend with whom I had spoken shortly after the murders. Prior to our conversation, he had been angry about the decline of South Central. Now he was livid. Farrell, like Mayor Bradley and me, was a black graduate of UCLA with Southern roots, born in Natchez, Mississippi in the 30s. Farrell's council district included many areas of South Central, and he seized on the issue of crime as the most pressing for his constituents. He was at once a harsh critic of the police, blasting the use of the infamous chokehold that had resulted in the deaths of several black arrestees, and a fervent advocate of the need for more police presence in his troubled district. Farrell, waging what he termed a personal war on crime and violence, proposed a special property tax on South Central residents to pay for additional police, a municipal lottery to finance an anti-crime unit, and the closing of Nickerson Gardens and other crime-ridden public housing projects. Comprising 58 square miles and more than 600,000 residents, South Central was a huge part of Los Angeles. However, Farrell said because the neighborhood was 80% black and home to what he called the working poor, it was being underserved by the police. Had the 20 shootings of the past 2 weeks occurred in a more affluent area of the city, Farrell said, the police response to community concerns would have been immediate. We simply asked for the city's standard of service, a police presence sufficient to deal with the nature and magnitude of the current crime problem. Farrell's conclusion was then read over the air. I therefore move that the Chief of Police be directed to report within 15 days on the police effort taken with the South Bureau area to combat the recent upsurge in gangland-style shootings. Finally, Farrell called for the identification of recent parolees who may be involved in these activities so that appropriate efforts may be made to immediately revoke their paroles. As my brother and I listened, we realized that our case had struck a nerve, jarring both citizen and politician from their mundane acceptance of street violence, the turning of a blind eye toward black-on-black crime. The case was coming to stand for something bigger than just one family's plight. Our tragedy was a symbol of all that had gone wrong in the inner city, the hopes, the promises of the Great Migration, the dreams of finding opportunity out west all felt like a joke. Like thousands of other black families, we fled the horrors of the South for the bloodshed of South Central.